Hi, I'm Linda Augsburg, Executive Editor of American Patchwork and Quilting Magazine. And in this Show Me How video, brought to you by the Baby Lock Crescendo Machine, I'm going to show you how to make this super easy t-shirt backpack. Now this is a great use for your t-shirts that you've outgrown or the kids have outgrown, or something that really holds memories for you. All you need is a t-shirt, some fusible interfacing, and some cording. So there'll be some tips and tricks online at allpeoplequilt.com/showmehow t-shirt backpack. So be sure to check in there and get some ideas on how to cut the right size. In addition to size, the other thing you need to bear in mind is, oddly enough, the depth of the hem on the t-shirt. You're going to cut off the hem first thing and turn it into the casing at the top of the bag. So when you pick out your cording, you want to make sure that you can get two thicknesses of your cording through this opening, this hem. Now I've used different cording in this t-shirt bag from the other ones that I've made. I used a thicker round I-cord that's filled with a cording. I've used flat trims, and in this one I used a flat trim that has a little bit of stretch to it. In addition, in this backpack we're going to sew those cording ends into that side seam. But another option is to use a buttonhole or a grommet, as I did here. In that case, again, you'd need to take into account not just your hem, but whether two thicknesses of your cording can fit through, and choose your grommet size or your buttonhole size accordingly. If you do use a grommet, there's always instructions on the package on how to install those. So the first thing you're going to do is cut off the hem of your t-shirt, and you can see here I've cut it off with about 3/8 of an inch beyond the last row of stitching, so that I have something to sew to the top for the casing. Next, you're going to slit this t-shirt up the side seams, or just up the sides if there's no seams. You're going to cut all the way to the shoulder seam so that you have that front and back separated. Then you're going to fuse fusible woven interfacing to the wrong side of the front and the wrong side of the back. You're going to want to make sure you press this with the logo or the screen printed design toward your ironing board, so that the fusible interfacing is fusible side, of course, to the t-shirt, but the other side up. You don't want to be hitting the iron to that transfer, because you might take some of the transfer off. Once you've got that fused on the front and back, you can decide what size you want to cut it. I could have cut a smaller backpack. I like to go all the way up to that neckline because it gives me a little more up here at the top. When I'm sewing the casing on, my logo doesn't get quite as scrunched. And I like a longer backpack, so I went further down, but you wouldn't have to. Whatever works for your t-shirt and for your uses. So now you can see what I've got is two pieces, a front and a back, that are both fusible interfaced. And then I cut two pieces of casing, and they're a 1/2 inch shorter than the width of the front and back of the t-shirt backpack. Now we're going to sew it together. So you can see I pinned the hem piece, which is now going to be the casing, about 1/4 inch from the edge of the front top of the t-shirt front. And then I'm going to sew along here with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. If you have a serger, this is a great project to use a serger on, but you don't have to. You can certainly just sew this with a straight stitch. Then you can do the same, sewing the second casing piece to the back of the backpack, or in this case, the back of the t-shirt. So when you get started on this part, you want to make sure you do use the back stitch. Take a couple of those tacking stitches so that you have a nice secure. You're going to get a lot of pull at that point with the cording going in and out. So you want to make sure you've got a good secure connection there. So your bottom seam with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Then you're going to sew your side seams. You're going to leave a 1 inch opening at the bottom. So I've put 2 pins here so that I know when to stop sewing. And up at the top, I wanted to make sure that I got the 2 casings out of the way of that 1/4 inch seam. So I've pinned them a little bit back so I won't catch them. And I'm just going to sew that side seam all the way down to those double pins, and I'll do the same on the other side. So now that I've got it all sewn together, I'm going to run my cording through my casing. Now I'm using a tool called a drawstring threader, and basically it's a long plastic stick with a little loop in it, and that's where you put your cording through and pull it back through. I like using this, but you can also just attach a safety pin to one end and run it through the casing. I just find this to be a little easier. So now I've pulled some cord through, some extra cord. I've threaded my threader back through the second casing with the loop at this end, and I'm going to pull this end through. I'm just going to feed that tip in to make it easier and then pull through. So I've used a 2-yard piece of cording for one side, and I've gone in and around and back out. So those 2 cords come out the same side of the backpack. Then I'm going to go take those cords inside the backpack and bring the ends out the hole that we left on that same side. So where they start and end at the top is where they're going to attach, the same side they'll attach at the bottom. I'm going to pin that in place, and then I'm going to run the second cord through. So as you can see, I've got the 2 little tails outside of the seam allowance. I want to make sure there's a little extra of that outside the seam so that I'm not right up to the edge and I run the risk of those cords fraying. I'm going to sew over that with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I'm going to sew over it a couple of times just to make sure those cords are securely sewn in that seam. So as you can see, it's just that easy to turn your t-shirt into a backpack. Be sure to go to allpeoplequilt.com/show-me-how t-shirt backpack to get some tips and hints on how to use different size t-shirts to make your own backpack. Thanks for joining us.